Welcome one and all to FilmMaster Reviews. I'm Adam J, and it's that time of year again to count down the worst films this particular year had to offer. Just like last year, I've compiled the worst movies I've seen all year into 15 distinct categories and ranked them accordingly. As always, I haven't seen every bad film that came out this year. It was almost at a point this year where I damn near scrapped the top 15 altogether and did a top 10 because I actually liked most of the films I saw this year. So to be on this list, these movies straight fucked up something fierce. With that said, these are the top 15 worst films of 2018 that I actually saw. Coming in at number 15 is my choice for Worst Mystery. And while mystery films were in short supply in 2018, The Girl in the Spider's Web didn't do much to help the genre. This film was meant to be the reboot of the Lisbeth Salander series, and while Claire Foy does fine with what little she has, she isn't given the opportunity to make the impact that Rooney Mara and Noomi Rapace did with the character. It's actually sad, because David Fincher's reboot of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was a fantastic film. Rooney Mara's Oscar nomination was very well deserved. But this was a lame reboot with a lame story, a lame mystery, and an all-around unexciting feel. Some of the action was cool, and Foy does perfectly fine, but even they couldn't save this utter train wreck of a reboot. Number 14 is Worst Excuse for a Sequel, and for the love of God, I will never understand the appeal that Ant-Man and the Wasp had on audiences. I saw this movie in theaters, was bored by most of it, and annoyed at the rest. This was a movie that prided itself on just being the laziest film it could possibly be. Half the plot made no sense, it was convoluted as all hell, the villains are a fucking waste in this, and almost every scene felt like an excuse to set up a random action set piece. The only thing I liked in this movie was the relationship between Scott Lang and his daughter. That was something I felt they greatly improved on from the first film, as the relationship between him and his daughter was damn near non-existent in the first. However, the rest of the film I couldn't care less about. They make Wasp look too powerful at the cost of making Ant-Man look like an incompetent moron. Ant-Man is a bumbling jackass for most of this movie, and he's the title fucking character. Michelle Pfeiffer was a good choice for Janet Van Dyne, but she's barely in the movie, and they never explain in the film how she was able to stay alive in the quantum realm. How did she get the clothes that she had? How has she sustained herself all these years? These are common sense questions that any moviegoer with a functioning brain should be asking, and they are never explained. And before you tell me that they'll probably explain it in a later film, I don't want to hear that shit. That doesn't excuse what this film tells us, which is literally nothing. The first Ant-Man did nothing for me, but it wasn't a horrible film. It was perfectly serviceable. Ant-Man and the Wasp is a pretty fucking horrible film. Better luck next time. Number 13 is my pick for Worst Fantasy. Now, I want it known that both Solo and The Crimes of Grindelwald came very close to making this list in this very category. They were neck and neck for this spot, as both films deeply disappointed me. Solo for being the most needless and boring live-action Star Wars film, and Crimes of Grindelwald being the most aimless of the Potterverse movies. However, if there was one movie that could keep them off of this list, it was The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. While the film does feature decent special effects for the most part, that is quite literally all it has going for it. The CGI and sets overtake the movie to the point of it being a bloated eyesore. The story is an absolute bore, the plot is beyond tired, and the acting is either too emotionless or too over the top. It just never finds a balance. Keira Knightley gives one of the most annoying performances I've seen in a while as the Sugar Plum Fairy. I love Keira Knightley, I really do. I've always loved her as an actress. I could not stand her in this. And most of that is due to the bad writing and that ear-piercingly annoying voice they made her use. From beginning to end, you can predict everything that is going to happen in this movie. You have seen this story a million times before. It's boring, it's lifeless, and coming from Joe Johnston, someone I have maintained for years is a seriously underrated talent. This film irritated me more than Solo could have ever hoped to do. Both Solo and Crimes of Grindelwald have many things to enjoy about them, despite their faults. Nutcracker does not. Coming in at number 12, we have the worst movie that bombed. Now, I'm curious, show of hands, has anyone else actually seen Dark Crimes, or am I the only one unfortunate enough to do so? Look, I want it known, I love Jim Carrey as an actor. I worship the man, especially when he takes on a serious role. He's phenomenal. He's a wonderful talent that I've always admired. The Majestic, Eternal Sunshine, my god, fantastic films. Dark Crimes, I have no idea what possessed Jim Carrey to even do this film. There is no merit to the script, the characters, the story, or the dialogue. Even the cinematography looks like vomit. If I was to sum up this movie in 2 words, they would have to be boring and unpleasant. Much like The Snowman, I didn't give 2 shits about anything happening in this film. I watched it, was bored and irritated through most of it, and completely forgot about it until I made this list. I don't remember the story, I don't even remember what Carrie was even doing in it. All I remember is the boredom I felt watching it. Jim, God man, I love you, but you are so much better than this. Coming in at number 11 is Worst Excuse for an Adaptation, and no movie deserves this more than A Wrinkle in Time. Much like The Nutcracker and The Four Realms, A Wrinkle in Time felt like a bad excuse for Disney animators to blow their wads all over the screen and let the effects take over. Even worse, it felt like an excuse to bolster Oprah Winfrey's ego. Because God knows it just couldn't get any bigger. I remember loving this story as a kid. I read the book twice growing up. But this adaptation was so boring and so lifeless in its execution that it committed probably the worst crime any adaptation could. It made me question whether the book I loved reading as a kid was even that good to begin with. With bad acting, obnoxious effects, and Oprah's ego being amplified to 9,000, this is one adaptation I really wish I'd skipped. Coming in at number 10 is Worst Action Film. Let me ask you a question. What happens when you remake Die Hard with The Rock in the lead role? You get Skyscraper. Because it's almost the same damn movie, done with no heart, no charisma, and no thought. Skyscraper is a terrible mess of a film with bad CGI, a story stolen straight from Die Hard, and action scenes stolen from better action movies. I feel like the director of this movie watched Die Hard and a bunch of Mission Impossible sequels over a weekend, chose his favorite parts to pick and recreate at random, and then crapped out a turd script that even Uwe Ball would probably pass on. Honestly, I can't think of anything redeeming or even anything new that this film did. It's a derivative mess of a film filled with things we've seen a million times before. There is nothing that makes Skyscraper stand on its own, and no, the mock marketing for the Die Hard posters, that shit did not help. I love The Rock, I love Neve Campbell, and it kills me to see them stuck in garbage like this. Speaking of garbage, number 9 is my pick for worst sci-fi film, and Pacific Rim Uprising certainly takes the gold in that department. I loved Pacific Rim. I thought that movie was an entirely badass film that fully embraced the cheesiness of its premise. Pacific Rim Uprising takes the cheese factor way too far, and yet still tries to take everything so damn seriously. Characters we liked from the first film were either absent or killed off, and they actually tried making Charlie Day, the comic relief from the first film, the villain. I'm sorry, no. In no sick reality are you gonna make Charlie Day threatening to an audience. The story, the characters, the action, it was all forgettable garbage. A disappointing sequel to a surprisingly awesome sci-fi film. How could this not make my list? It's not Independence Day Resurgence, but it's damn close. At number 8 is Worst Thriller, and that undoubtedly goes to The Nun. The Nun is a ridiculously stupid, convoluted, and nonsensical mess of a film filled with tired jump scares and idiotic characters. I struggled to find anything to like in this movie, and it gets worse the more I think about it. It was a movie that I was strangely anticipating because of how much I loved the nun character in The Conjuring 2. I thought it might be dumb considering how it conflicts with the nun's backstory in the other film, and sadly I was right. I liked the 2 Conjuring films, and I even liked Annabelle Creation, but God did I hate this. Try harder next time. At number 7 is Worst Excuse for a Remake. And may I just say how happy I am that Robin Hood bombed? What an absolute train wreck this was. This movie is filled with phenomenal talent. Ben Mendelsohn, Taron Egerton, Jamie Foxx, and yet they all somehow managed to give terrible performances. How did that happen? There was an expert level of incompetent directing on display here. The action is overproduced, the movie does nothing with the Robin Hood lore that any self-respecting fan of the character would want to see, and the writing is atrocious. Some of the dialogue in this film is so bad, it's amazing that anyone read the script and said that this was okay to greenlight. I have always been a fan of the Robin Hood lore. I love the BBC show. I love the Disney film. Robin Hood Prince of Thieves is one of my favorite movies, and I even love Men in Tights for parodying it. I don't know what the hell this crap was. I went into this movie wanting to love it, despite the bad trailers. I walked out beyond pissed off, knowing that this film was not escaping this very list. At number 6 is Worst Comedy, and as much as I love Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly, Holmes and Watson was an absolute dumpster fire. Look, I like the idea of taking a comedic approach with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. In fact, one of my favorite Family Guy episodes was a parody they did of Sherlock Holmes. I'm not against this at all, but when it is this unfunny, tedious, and stupid, let's just say my patience wears out pretty quickly. I watched this entire movie and didn't laugh once. Not once! Even some of the worst comedies this year were able to get a few chuckles out of me. Rebecca Hall and Ralph Fiennes are both wasted in this mess, and Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly deserve better material than this. I loved Step Brothers. I loved Talladega Nights, but I'm sorry, I would rather put a drill to my temple while watching Baywatch than sit through this monstrosity a second time. Number 5 is my pick for worst horror film, and if you saw my recent review for it, it should surprise none of you that it's Hellfest. Now, I loved the idea of this movie, but the more you think about the movie after watching it, the less sense it makes and the less you actually care. This was a movie I saw and forgot about almost the second it was over. I didn't like the characters, I found the overall plot generic, and not a bit of this movie was scary. It was a lifeless bore of a film made by the same guy who directed Paranormal Activity 6. Oh, what a delight. It bothers me because I saw the trailers and thought it looked cool. I was happy to see a new slasher film in the theaters again. This just did not do it for me at all. Hellfest is the most forgettable horror film in recent memory. At number 4 is my pick for worst comic book movie, and while I'm sure some will not agree, Venom was one of the most miserable experiences of 2018 for me. This movie did not understand Venom. It barely understood Eddie Brock, and seemed to pride itself on taking itself too seriously while also trying to be a buddy comedy. The comedy doesn't work, and Tom Hardy is reduced to a bumbling jackass for most of it. I tuned out the moment I saw Tom Hardy jump in a lobster tank. What the fuck was that garbage? Michelle Williams is completely wasted in this, and Riz Ahmed is one of the most bland, generic, and forgettable villains I've ever seen. Not just in a comic book movie, but in any movie. He's a great villain in the comics, but he's reduced to being the generic bad guy here. This movie was so bad that it gave me a bigger appreciation for Spider-Man 3. What vile darkness made this thing? What movie does that to a person? The CGI is mostly awful, especially in the action scenes. Venom is a black symbiote, and most of the action takes place at night, so half the time, you can barely make out a damn thing happening. And to add insult to injury, Venom doesn't show up until an hour into this 90-minute movie. What the fuck is with this thing? I'm sorry, what this movie did to Venom is absolutely unforgivable, and I will never understand how so many people liked it. When Spider-Man 3 does a better job adapting the character than you know you done fucked up. At number 3 is my pick for worst drama, and if you haven't guessed off the bat that it's 50 Shades Freed, you obviously don't know me that well. 50 Shades Freed was a movie that I damn near had a meltdown reviewing earlier in the year, but goddammit, am I happy that this nightmarish albatross of a series is finally over. This is a movie with no story through most of it, that tries to shove in some semblance of a plot in the last 15 minutes. By then, I doubt anyone gave a shit. I have never seen worse chemistry between two human beings than I have between Jamie Dornan and Dakota Johnson. I have never seen a more toxic relationship portrayed on film. The Joker and Harley Quinn? Fucking child's play. Anastasia Steele and Christian Grey are horrible people in a horrible relationship in a horrible film. 50 Shades Freed. Even the title sounds like it's finally freeing you from its abominable clutches. I never want to think about this film or this series again. I'm finally done. Let's just move on with our lives, at least until the next Twilight clone comes along to torture us. Now we're coming down to the wire, folks. At number 2 is my pick for worst animated film. And no animated film pissed me off more in 2018 than The Grinch. Where to even begin with this abomination? Ugh, this is gonna be a long one. Okay, let's begin. The Grinch isn't even the Grinch. He's a mutated Gru. He's not the mean-spirited curmudgeon we know and love, he's just meaner than the average guy. So as much as Benedict Cumberbatch tries, his performance isn't able to stand out. I mean, given good material, Benedict Cumberbatch playing the character should be a match made in heaven. But with this crap, Cumberbatch is stuck just being a regular grumpy guy and not the Grinch. Half the lines from the original book are either changed or completely ignored, and Pharrell Williams narrates the film with all the emotion of a wet fucking carrot. His narration is beyond lifeless, and it doesn't work with a film that's trying to be this lively and colorful. We somehow went from Boris Karloff to Sir Anthony Hopkins to Pharrell Williams on autopilot. Someone fucking shoot me now. It's beyond unfunny. Most of the humor is just cringeworthy. I don't recall laughing once, and neither does my girlfriend, who I'm pretty sure hated this more than I did. Now, like the Jim Carrey version of The Grinch, this film also tries to give a reason for the Grinch hating Christmas. But here's the difference between the two. In the Jim Carrey version, it actually made sense. They established early on that he grew up not liking Christmas because he was more mean-spirited than the rest. But the day he tried actually giving it a chance, he was mocked and ridiculed, which only fueled his hatred for the holiday more. When he tried giving it a second chance as an adult, he was mocked and ridiculed all over again, prompting him to steal the Who's Christmas. That backstory actually made sense. I can understand his hatred for Christmas. In this new film, there's really no reason for him to hate Christmas. He was stuck in an orphanage as a child. He was all alone, and that somehow gives him a hatred for just Christmas, and somehow no hatred for any other holidays out of the year. He was always alone. Why does he only hate Christmas? But what makes it worse is that as an adult, he has no excuse to be alone. Everyone in Whoville is incredibly nice to him. The whole "I was rejected, so I must be alone" arc doesn't work when everyone else is literally telling you that you don't have to be alone, you fucking moron! Oh, God, I hate this movie. God, I hate it. But probably the biggest insult to the Grinch is this. What is the moral of the book? Maybe Christmas doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas perhaps means a little bit more. What's the moral in the original animated film?
Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas perhaps means a little bit more.
What's the moral of the Jim Carrey movie?
Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more.
Yeah, the moral is not in this damn movie, because they changed it to a moral about togetherness, and how hearing people sing will brighten your day or some shit, and fuck this movie in the eye socket. I'm sorry, I really hate this film. The more I think about it, the more it angers me. Screw this abomination, and let us never speak of it again. And here we are at number 1. My pick for the absolute worst film of the year is Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. Now, if you want to know all the reasons why I despise this film, you can watch my epic film fail that I did of it last month. For now, here are the highlights. This film is the absolute worst in the series, which given some of the other entries is quite the accomplishment. The plot makes no sense, the two leads are just as annoying as they were in the first Jurassic World film, the new characters are beyond stupid, and the movie is littered with so many plot holes that I'm surprised no one fell in one. It's actually shocking to me that this film was directed by Jay Bayona, who helmed The Impossible, The Orphanage, and A Monster Calls, all spectacular movies. Much like Adam Wingard in Death Note, this director was saddled with a garbage script, and it's impossible to take anything in this movie seriously. Events and details from the previous films are insultingly ignored, its tone is inconsistent as hell, the characters are all fucking idiots, the themes and messages are bullshit, and it all dissolves into a big hot mess by the end. This movie had no idea what it wanted to be, and it is a slap in the face to not only the original Jurassic Park, but the work of Michael Crichton as well. This movie is so fucking stupid it makes my head spin. I honestly don't want to see a sequel if they keep the same writers. I'm just done. I have lost all hope for this series going forward. Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom is one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen, and is most definitely my pick for the worst film of 2018. Fuck this movie and just let the franchise die already. You've killed it enough. So those were my picks for the worst of 2018. What are yours? Please let me know in the comment box below, and please subscribe if you'd like to see more.